Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi Kruse. Look, we talk about trans issues a lot on the show. It's not because I'm transphobe, whatever you want to call me. I mean, I have my opinions on the matter. If you're an adult, you do you. I've made this very clear time and time again. If you're going to throw it in my face and make me believe or make me think I have to believe biological falsehoods, I'm not down with that. I'm also not down with the whole let's do surgical interventions or help with puberty blockers for kids. I think that's weird. But to me, I talk about the trans issues a lot, especially as it relates to, and usually only I think as it relates to the intersection of the government and sort of the radical gender agenda, because I think it's proof of how stupid things have gotten. Like, some of this stuff is proof of how dumb and wasteful the government is, and also how ridiculous the media is in buying into things that make absolutely no sense and running cover for this radical agenda. So that's why I talk about trans issues a lot. It's just, to me, that kind of culture war issue that separates people with common sense from people who do not have a lick of common sense. And one of the things I've talked about quite a bit on the show lately is the funding of transgender care by the government. For instance, we had the news on the show earlier this week, last week, I don't know, the days all melt together, about in the middle of a budget crisis, state government saying, oh, we're going to hire, and what we're supposed to believe is a hiring freeze, we're going to hire a doctor for our state prison system that specifically handles the care of transgender inmates. And you've got a handful of them in the state prison system, and you're paying this person $269,000 a year to provide concierge service for trans inmates. Trans inmates can also get, on the backs of taxpayers, free laser hair removal if they want to, feel more feminine. So these sorts of things matter. It's not just a cultural issue or a wedge issue. They matter because they show the wasteful, identity-obsessed agenda of government. And the media is no better. So we've talked a lot about this one particular trans inmate. So his real name is Brian Kim, but he identifies as a woman named Amber Faye Fox Kim, right? Amber Faye Fox Kim. Okay. So not the only transgender inmate in the state, certainly, but Amber Faye Fox Kim, aka Brian Kim, has made the news quite a bit because he has complained a lot about his treatment as a transgender inmate, and he's done so publicly. And so he's been at the center of a lot of news coverage, most of it sob coverage from the leftist media. I mean, The Stranger wrote a whole story on Brian Kim and the woes of Brian had gone on a hunger strike because he got removed from the women's prison. Brian had been in the women's prison because the state's just like, oh, you say you're a girl? Go ahead, into the women's prison. But of course, as you know, there was an issue in the women's prison. Brian got caught having sex with a woman. And so they sent him back to the men's prison. And The Stranger did this sob story about how could they do this to this inmate, and didn't mention one time that Brian Kim is a double murderer. We'll get to more of that in a moment. But Brian Kim brutally murdered his parents. And so it was a sob story about, oh my gosh, his treatment behind bars is horrible as a trans inmate. No mention at all. Double murderer. So that's ridiculous. And this article from the Seattle Times that came out late yesterday, no better. So the Seattle Times headline, trans woman argues move to Washington men's prison is cruel punishment. Good God. You'd think maybe the Times would want to cover, if they care about covering something on the trans agenda, talk about our story about a medical doctor being hired specifically for trans inmates, or them wasting money in the middle of a budget crisis on providing laser hair removal to trans inmates. Any of that stuff. No. We have to do another sob story about the trans inmate who complains a lot publicly because they can't get what they want behind bars after killing 2 people. So it says a transgender woman filed a court petition Tuesday arguing that her transfer to a men's prison, where she has been in solitary confinement for months, constitutes cruel punishment. Kim's transfer came about 3 months after she received an infraction for having sex with another incarcerated woman. No. She didn't have sex with another incarcerated woman. He had sex with an incarcerated woman because he convinced the state of Washington to put him in a woman's prison. I think it's interesting, though, this So it says she has been in solitary confinement for months, and that constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Well, as the Seattle Times goes to point out, the decision to be in solitary confinement was his decision. They wrote, I'm just reading the Seattle Times article, they call he or she, whatever it is. When she was moved to Monroe, Kim elected to be housed in solitary confinement rather than enter general population with men. She has been in solitary for about 6 months now, excluding a short transfer for gender-affirming surgery. Yeah. So, I mean, they're giving Brian Kim, double murderer, everything he wants behind bars, including a transfer so he could get gender-affirming surgery. We are being denied our humanity in a systemic way. Being in isolation like this is soul-sucking, Kim said. They're literally quoting a double murderer who is whining that he's being denied his humanity, and it's soul-sucking. Like, I mean, the Seattle Times, could you not reach out to any people who loved the two individuals who Brian Kim killed and ask them if they felt like those murders were, those victims were denied their humanity? That what happened to them was soul-sucking, quite literally, because they were taken off the face of the earth. And now you've got Brian Kim, Amber Faye Fox Kim, whatever your preference is, who routinely is given some of the most influential and wide read or consumed news outlets in the state to air their grievances about how they're treated in prison. You guys, this is insane stuff. So the Seattle Times gives a little background on the trans prison population. Says about 2% of the incarcerated adults in Washington state have self-identified as transgender or non-binary, 284 people. The department has had 22 transgender people in a facility that aligns with their gender identity since the process of gender-affirming housing, according to DOC. So of the entire state prison population, thousands and thousands of thousands and thousands of people, we're talking about 22 people really who are impacted by the sort of want to be in a prison that doesn't align, where the rest of the population is their birth gender, or they don't align with whatever it is. So we're talking about such a small fraction of prison inmates, yet look how much attention, money, dedicated doctor, dedicated services, free surgeries that are purely cosmetic. They want to say this is about physical and mental health, like these are necessary surgeries. These are purely cosmetic surgeries. So they get all these things, and on top of that, they get 1,500 words in the Seattle Times to complain about their treatment when they're being waited on behind bars, hand and foot, regardless of the severity of their crime. They also, in this article, go on to talk to an advocacy organization for incarcerated LGBTQ plus people. And this whole Seattle Times article is just absolutely hook, line, and sinker on the gender identity stuff. It's very disheartening that a year ago, I was actually really impressed with the direction that Washington DOC was going. They were actually in the process of becoming a national leader in transgender care for individuals who are incarcerated, said Haley Ochinga, the executive director of Beyond These Walls, an advocacy organization for incarcerated LGBTQ plus people. But then she goes on to say that the last few months, the state of Washington, the DOC, really started backsliding. We've increasingly heard more and more of transgender women who have been returned to men's prison in general population after their surgeries. They fear for their safety every single day, which part of me, that kind of gives me hope, like, oh, it's backsliding? If the person who thinks it's perfectly appropriate to put a biological man in a women's prison thinks Washington State's Department of Corrections is backsliding, that's probably a good thing for those of us with common sense. Like maybe some of this attention, some of these stories about how women who are incarcerated in the women's prison feel when they're forced to bunk with a biological man. Maybe some of those stories are sinking in. I don't know. I don't have a lot of hope, but that's part of it. They talked to another 50-year-old transgender woman, Erica Assad, who's housed at the Monroe Corrections Complex, said the treatment of trans people often varies depending on what facility they're housed in. At prisons in more conservative areas of the state, she said staff are more likely to misgender incarcerated people or ignore allegations of being preyed upon by cisgender men. You guys, this is a news story from the Seattle Times. And they are honest to God. You don't get into Monroe unless you did something serious. They are honest to God, just using their platform to share the complaint of a prison inmate who says that in certain prisons in our state, they get misgendered. They get misgendered, and they're preyed upon by the cisgender. I mean, it's what did Dora used to do? The woke word dice. I mean, you could woke word dice all day on the Seattle Times article. So they go back to hearing from Kim, the double murderer at the center of this. Kim said she hopes that she'll be returned to the Washington Correction Center for Women, where he broke the rules by having sex with a woman there in a cell. That's non-consensual. You can't have consensual sex in prison. Seattle Times is basically advocating for them to get sent back to a women's prison where they broke the rules by having sex with a woman as a man, with all their appendages intact. Kim said she hopes that she'll be returned to the Washington Correction Center for Women, but she also hopes her petition forces the Department of Corrections to reconsider how they treat incarcerated people. Prison is supposed to be limited to a loss of liberty, Kim stated in her declaration to the appellate court, but prison is not supposed to include the loss of the pursuit of happiness. You guys, that's a double murderer. That's a double murderer. Brian Kim was convicted of and is currently incarcerated because 2 counts, aggravated murder in the first degree, killed his parents, Richard and Teresa Kim, never mentioned by name in that Seattle Times article. Richard Kim was stabbed to death. Teresa Kim was strangled to death by Brian Kim, who the Seattle Times is now completely willing to use. Oh, Amber Faye Fox Kim, he or her, she, her. And they're losing, they're complaining, they're losing their pursuit of happiness behind bars. You killed 2 people. You stabbed your dad to death and you strangled your mom to death. The Seattle Times had like the smallest little, I just want to read this mention. Hold on. It was in here. I got to pull it back out. 1 second. I want to read you what they said. The only mention of this. Kim, this is the only mention. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs down. Kim says she's being denied her humanity. And then it says, Kim, who is serving a life sentence for 2 counts of first-degree murder, spent years at men's prisons in Washington. There, she said she endured physical and sexual violence. Only reference to what this inmate did. The rest of it is total sob story. I'm being denied my humanity. I'm being denied my pursuit of happiness. I have to be in solitary confinement by my own choice because I don't feel safe around the men. Even though as a man, when I was in the women's prison, I had non-consensual sex with another woman. And you don't think that woman might have felt forced or whatever it is, or coerced? How do I say no to this man? You can't have consensual sex behind bars. So I broke the rules. I broke a serious rule. And I got sent back to the man's prison. And all I have to do is reach out to the Seattle Times. And they will spin my sob story to all of their readers. And they will hardly even mention that I'm in here because I stabbed my dad to death and I strangled my mom to death. The media is absolutely dead. But this just shows you, again, for me, it really is about, it's not so much like, I do I have anything against Brian Kim personally? I mean, he killed 2 people, so in that sense, yes. But like, honestly, if Brian Kim wants to be behind bars, Amber Faye Fox Kim, and strut around Monroe Prison, presenting as a woman to the best of their ability, I don't care. But I do care if we're going to pay for his gender reassignment surgery. I do care when we're being told we need to pay for his laser hair removal. I do care when we're being told it's no big deal that he is going to be put in a prison with women, many of whom do not want him there, or any other man in their cells for that matter. And I do care when we're told that we're transphobes for saying that. And I do care when the media, which is supposed to really think critically about these issues, is going to spin a sob tale for a double killer and not even mention the heinous nature of their crime. What are the family and friends, if there's any surviving ones left, he killed both of the parents, what do they think about this? What do they think about Brian Kim being able to, whenever they reach out to the media, get 1,000 words in the Times or in the Stranger to share their sob story about how their humanity is being taken from them behind bars? Does the Seattle Times care? Did the Seattle Times try to reach out to anyone? Victims advocates, anything? Did they care to consider how stories like this might make victims feel? It goes lockstep with the Democratic priority in Olympia of the criminals have more rights than the victims. The criminals are treated like victims. The criminals get handouts. The criminals get special treatments and the rest of us just get jack shit. So that's why I care so much about this trans agenda nonsense, because it does separate the people who have common sense from the people who do not. And unfortunately, the Seattle Times is showing that it is in the group of the people who do not have any common sense. Yet they're the largest newspaper in the state of Washington. That's scary stuff. So speaking of the radical gender agenda, oh my God. So the Olympia City Council, all the things going on right now, it's also a matter of priorities, right? That was the issue with the budget. It's like all these things, $14 billion deficit, all these priorities, things we need to spend money on to fix or whatever, maybe tax relief for the struggling middle class, and you're hiring a doctor to provide concierge medical service for transgender inmates and getting them laser hair removal. So a lot of this is a matter of priorities too. And I would say the same thing for the city of Olympia. So the city of Olympia has a ton of problems, many of them similar to what's happening in Seattle and other progressive areas. They have a homeless crisis. They have a drug crisis. They have a crime crisis. They have a lot of quality of life issues downtown. What is, though, the Olympia City Council worried about? Well, Donald Trump, of course, number one. Number one, Democrats, that's got to be the first thing they talk about. All the problems in the state, but Donald Trump, he's really scary. So they're talking about that and preemptively what they can do to protect the citizens of Olympia from Donald J. Trump. And so they think it is very, very urgent, and they spent a lot of time at their last meeting talking about the urgent need to make the city of Olympia a sanctuary city for transgender people. This is from the Olympian. Will Olympia become a sanctuary city for trans and queer people? Here's what the council thinks. It's like, okay, first of all, that's one of the most progressive cities on the entire West Coast. If it's not already a sanctuary for queer and trans people, then you're saying and admitting that leftists are real hateful bigots. I think about all this stuff with Seattle. It's like, we need like laws and declarations to make Seattle a welcoming place. You're telling me you aren't already? Because it's just filled with leftists and progressives. It says about a dozen community members spoke during public comment December 10th to ask the council to adopt a resolution expanding the city's sanctuary status. Every member of the council expressed their support for exploring a new sanctuary status. Council member Jim Cooper said the city should move quickly with the path forward, preferably before January 20th, when big bad President-elect Donald Trump will be sworn into office. Okay, I added the big bad part. Olympia Mayor Dante Payne says that he shares their fears going into the second Trump administration.
I will say, though, that I'm thinking about, the next federal administration is going to likely target sanctuary cities. So what you're all here asking us to do is to expand our sanctuary city status. And I think it says so much about who we are as Olympians, as a community, that we're not going to be bullied into compromising our values, and we're going to fight back. Just know that I personally am sitting with you in your angst and your anxiety, your fear, your sadness, all of it.
I give up. Can I leave for the day? Seriously, come on. It's so hard for me. I want to understand people who believe that that stuff is important and is the role of government. Like, what does it even mean to have a sanctuary for transgender people? What does that mean? I know what it means for illegal immigrants. I know what a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants means. It means that they're basically not going to cooperate with the feds and ICE and, not going to put ICE detainers on people. So I don't agree with that, but at least I know what that means. What does it mean to be a sanctuary city for queer and trans people? What does it mean that it doesn't already mean? That it's a welcoming city, that you're going to celebrate Pride, that you're going to make the Pride sidewalks and stuff and spend taxpayer money on that, that you're going to talk about at every single juncture in city government, DEI, diversity and all that stuff. You're already doing all of that. So what does it mean, besides just a show of how woke you are? Does it actually mean anything to rush really quickly before January 20th and make Olympia a sanctuary city for trans and queer people? We have to purge our government of these individuals. We have to purge our government of these individuals who are doing anything but what the role of government should be. And again, it has nothing to do with liking, not liking transgender individuals, not believing that they're owed basic humanity. Of course, they're owed basic humanity. Now, I would argue if you're in prison for double murder, I don't really care if you're given basic humanity. But yes, I believe transgender individuals are owed the same basic humanity that all of us are. But the rest of us just want to be left alone. And isn't that what they should want too? Shouldn't they just want to be left alone to live their lives? But that doesn't seem to be what they want. It's like the opposite of what they want. I compared to like Antifa, where Antifa is always like, don't film me. Don't take my picture. Don't put my name in the paper. And then they're out there like, I've never seen a group of people like Antifa who says who wants more attention than Antifa, yet says they want no attention. Like everything they do, they go out, they dress like ninjas, they parade around, they break things, blah, blah, blah. Oh, but I don't want any attention. Yeah, no, you do want attention. So it's the same with the transgender population. If I'm to believe like that you just want basic humanity and to be treated like everyone else, then why are you okay with all these things that treat you above and beyond everyone else? Why would you be okay with concierge medical service in prison that other prison inmates do not get for their specific individual needs? No, you want to be treated, and you're demanding to be treated better than everyone else, different from everyone else, when you should just want to be left alone. It's doesn't make any sense. These are the priorities of our government at a time when we have so many other things that demand our attention. If you're thinking about selling your home at some point this year, highly recommend reaching out to our friend Wes Jones. We're talking to him about the state of the real estate market, and things have been slow, but home prices are actually still pretty high.
I'm hearing a lot of things. People are, oh gosh, well, there might be a recession coming up. I'm like, hey guys, anybody working in real estate has been living it for like the last 30 months or so. It's a strange conundrum though, because sales are low, but prices are still very, very high. You can still sell and you can plan on making a lot of money, but you might have to prepare your home a little bit harder and do a little bit more work than you have in the past, because buyers are a little bit, less forgiving.
Yeah, and Wes Jones can help you out with a lot of that. They offer a listing boost concierge service. Come in, he can give you suggestions for what he thinks needs to be done to your home before you put it on the market. If some of that is going to cost money that you simply don't have, they can help front the cost of it, even help manage the project. So just take a lot of stress and worry off your plate as you try to sell your home, which is already a big stressful thing. So sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, so 2025 legislative session begins second week in January. It's going to be a very busy time, as you know. We'll be covering it extensively. I think the bulk of it is going to be absorbed by these budgetary fights that we talked a lot about on the show this week already. It's something we're going to continue to address, the fact that we have this massive budget deficit created by Democrats, and their way out of it is going to be to tax businesses and the rich, so therefore hurting our economy, and to spend more money. So we've got to spend our way out of a deficit. That's what I do. No money in my bank account. It is kind of like how when I was in college, I'd have like $30 in my bank account, You'd be rolling with like $30. Then your friends would ask you to go to the bar, and you'd be like, check your bank account, $30. Yeah, I can go to the bar. go get a few drinks. Yeah, I can afford that Frappuccino. That's what they literally spend money like college kids. I'm just going to ignore. I don't want to think about my credit card debt. So I'm just going to go spend more money, even more money. I mean, they're just insane. So we'll be talking about that quite a bit. And one of the questions I have is there kind of a silver lining to the budget crisis happening in the first year of the Ferguson administration? We've been through a couple years ever since 2020, really, of really insane far left fringe bills and policies being pushed. So I thought, well, maybe if they're dealing with the budget and they're sort of knee deep in that, they won't have the time to revisit some of these absolutely asinine policies on public safety, et cetera, that they've been trying to push through. But oh no, they're going to do it anyway. They'll find time to do it all. So the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability is an entity you've probably heard quite a lot about. They've pushed most of the soft on crime policies that you see pushed in Olympia came from the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. They call themselves the Coalition for Police Accountability. Look, I support police accountability. Of course I do. It's not about police accountability for them. They just hate the cops. They genuinely hate the police. And so they push all these anti-police policies, and they find state lawmakers who are willing to carry the torch for them in the form of some sort of bill. And so then they have these bills that are introduced in Olympia. So they have released their 2025 legislative priorities. Here they are. First, AG investigations and reform. That would be accountability for police and sheriff's department, adding accountability by granting authority to the state attorney general to do investigations of agencies where there's an alleged pattern and practice of violating the civil and constitutional rights of persons. Yeah, that's a really great tool to give the attorney general's office. Totally necessary and absolutely will not be abused for political purposes. And then this one's my favorite, I think. By favorite, I mean the stupidest. Traffic safety for all. Okay, I love traffic safety for all. What are you going to do to improve traffic safety? Crack down on left lane campers? Crack down on DUI drivers? Give police more tools to keep the roadways safe? What is it going to be? Traffic stops are the most common interaction people have with law enforcement. Ending traffic stops for non-moving violations will increase safety for the public and officers. It will also increase equity and is a solution for the disproportionate stops involving Black, Latino, Native American, and Pacific Islander drivers. Yeah, so they want to improve traffic safety for all by completely prohibiting the ability of police to stop people for non-moving violations. Which, as you know, sometimes if you suspect a DUI driver, you might be able to say, well, they got, expired tabs or whatever it is. So I'm going to pull over for that, but I think they're DUI. Nope, no more of that because, at night, the police really know what color the person is behind the wheel of that car. That's going to improve traffic safety for all. Banger of an idea there. Independent prosecution. They say we need an independent prosecutor to make the charging decisions for police use of deadly force. In 2021, the legislature created a statewide office to do criminal investigations into officers' use of deadly force. Where there is a death or serious injury, the caseload from this office needs to be handled by a state independent prosecutor separate from the 39 county prosecutors. Yeah, so handing it over to a state-appointed prosecutor to decide whether to prosecute police officers for uses of deadly force. That absolutely won't be politicized at all. And they absolutely would not put an anti-cop person in that position. No, I'm sure that it'll be a fair-minded individual. And then here's the last one that we're going to discuss today. Sheriffs and police chiefs' eligibility. They said we must modernize and align the laws governing sheriffs, chiefs, and marshals to enhance accountability, public trust, and confidence in law enforcement leadership by clarifying eligibility requirements, certification standards, background check procedures, and the permissible use of volunteers. This legislation aims to promote professionalism, transparency, and consistency in law enforcement practices throughout throughout Washington state. Now, here's what's scary about that. So there are some aspects of that proposal that are sort of mundane, bringing in line for sheriffs and police chiefs who are in sheriffs, most times elected officials. Police chiefs are typically appointed, but making sure that they have passed, some routine background checks, which I think is good for everyone. If you're going to serve, if you're running for governor, if you're running for Senate, if you're running for school board, I think everyone who's running for office should have to go through a formal background check process, the results of which should be posted for voters to consider. I think that's perfectly fine. And yeah, it's perfectly fine for sheriffs and police chiefs, and most sheriffs and police chiefs will agree with that as well. But what this really, and they'll paint it as something totally reasonable. Oh no, all this is reasonable. All of these new requirements we want for sheriffs and police chiefs, totally reasonable. Who would oppose this? But buried in there are some very scary, unreasonable things and what it aims to do. I think ultimately what they want in Olympia is they want all sheriffs to be appointed positions, just like King County did. Because remember, voters in King County decided that the King County sheriff, voters voted to stop voting for the sheriff. I think they were totally hoodwinked into that. But now the sheriff is a political appointee. And they were sold a bill of goods that will actually make them more accountable to the people. More accountability if a politician appoints the sheriff than if the voters vote on the sheriff. So they did that in King County. I really think that's what they want to see statewide. I don't think they want voters electing anyone into a law enforcement capacity. But what this bill in particular is going to do is it's going to try to give more power over who voters in individual counties elect to be sheriff to state appointees. So they haven't dropped the bill on this. They have sponsors for it, but I haven't seen the actual legislation to change these eligibility requirements for sheriffs and police chiefs. However, fear not, because we do have Senate Bill 5905, which is what they tried to do in this regard this past legislative session. So they're probably just going to re-up it. They might make a few changes, but we know what they tried to do last session. It's probably very similar to what they're pushing again this session. And again, some of it has to do with background checks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a few things in there that freak me the hell out. So first of all, they want to expand the power and give more power to the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, which honestly has just been filled with a lot of left-wing people at this point. They want to give them more authority to manage these background checks and to look into other aspects of the background of sheriffs and police chiefs, including an inquiry into whether the applicant has any past or present affiliations with extremist organizations as defined by the commission, and a review of the applicant's social media accounts. Does that sound scary to you? That this commission, full of state appointees, wants power after a sheriff's already elected. Sheriff's already in office, right? But if they get a sheriff like an Adam Fortney, who was the sheriff in Snohomish County, and you remember he was billed by Democrats as an extremist, ties to right-wing extremism. And they did everything they could as Democrats to get him out of office because he was a tough-on-crime sheriff who wasn't going to play their little game of being soft on criminals. So they went after them. I mean, they tried to get him out of office via recall. When that didn't work, they Democrats supported someone to challenge him, told all these lies about ties to right-wing extremism because they don't want tough-on-crime sheriffs. So think about that. So let's say you get someone like Adam Fortney elected. That's what this is. I really think that's what this is for. People like Adam Fortney that are going to be tough on crime. Then you could have the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission that after he's elected runs all the background checks on it, right? But as part of the background checks, not just criminal stuff, which you would think would come out ahead of an election, right? But they're also going to do inquiries into whether he has any past or present affiliations with extremist organizations as defined by the commission, which is a bunch of left-wing state appointees. You really think that they're going to have a fair application of what constitutes an extremist organization? Or what constitutes past or present affiliation? I mean, I have pictures probably. People come up and take pictures with me all the time. I don't ask who they are. I don't ask them before we take a picture, have you had any past or present affiliation with an extremist organization? No, I just say, hey, yeah, happy to take a picture. So what if you're a sheriff and you do that? And then they're like, look at him. He's got a picture with someone who's like a member of the Proud Boys. So again, you see how scary this is. And also a review of the applicant's social media accounts. Again, if you're looking at that through a biased lens, you could find all sorts of stuff. Trump posts. Oh, he supports Donald Trump. And then they'll determine if a sheriff that's already been elected, quote, jeopardizes public trust or confidence in the law enforcement profession, and it gives them more power to remove them from their position that they were duly elected to. That's terrifying stuff. So they couch that stuff in all these mundane speak. Like, oh no, we're just bringing parity to, background checks. Like, don't you want the backgrounds checked on sheriffs and police chiefs and to know that they're not extremists or whatever it is? They couch it in all this language that seems reasonable, but when you do a deep dive, it's clearly the result of anti-police animus. And they told on themselves here. So the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, in putting out its 2025 legislative priorities, they had some links in there to kind of background reading material that has helped them inform their priorities. One of the honest-to-God links that they have since removed, by the way, was to a book called The Highest Law in the Land, How the Unchecked Power of Sheriffs Threatens Democracy, by Jessica Pishko, who writes in the book that sheriffs are, quote, uniquely harmful historically and in the present day. She went on to write, I'm of the opinion that policing in this country ought to be reevaluated and indeed reduced as much as possible. Eliminating the sheriff's office is not a difficult call at all. Now I know why they took the links out of those, because people said, why are you linking to someone who is outright saying that she believes sheriffs are harmful and that they should be eliminated, and that's not a difficult call at all. So you're being informed by this anti-cop book to come up with your 2025 legislative agenda, including putting more oversight on duly elected sheriffs, and we're to believe that that is not about anti-police animus, and that you should be trusted, that a state commission of political appointees should be trusted with fairly and accurately evaluating the sheriffs that voters choose in their individual counties? Yeah, give me a break. So the Washington State Sheriff's Association put out a lengthy statement on this, and it boils down to this. They said the Coalition for Police Accountability's proposal opens the possibility of a political chokehold over counties' electoral choices and gives state appointees the power to silence the voice of voters. And that really is what this is about. It should not be up to state appointees to decide at the county level whether a sheriff has jeopardized public trust or confidence in the law enforcement profession, especially when the jobs of law enforcement have been so unfairly politicized by politicians in Olympia. So Kittitas County Sheriff Clay Myers, he is with the Washington State Sheriff's Association, and he feels very strongly about some of these changes. We talked about it a little bit.
The Criminal Justice Training Commission or its panels should not be empowered to remove a sheriff from office. And that's what this proposed legislation would do. And there's two elements of it that we're concerned about because both are subjective. One of them is, as you described. The second one is or has been associated with an extremist group. Okay. An extremist group, depending on who you talk to, very subjective. And what does associated mean?
Yeah.
In other words, we've seen over the last, gosh, I guess going back to really the Black Lives Matter movement, a photograph of this particular person in college, standing next to this particular group. And so if a sheriff who was asked to speak, to an organization to clarify their roles could be construed as, well, you were associated with this extremist group. And what's an extremist group today as opposed to 20 years ago? Or 2 years from now, what's an extremist group going to be? So it's just that subjective nature where this panel could, based on what's happening right now, decide, well, subjectively, we think you shouldn't be sheriff, so we're going to pull your peace officer certification and kick you out of office.
It's really wild because, I mean, we know the concern, obviously, from my perspective, is the job of law enforcement has been so politicized, and I believe unfairly so, in a way that I can't imagine them being able to make these decisions in a way that's not political. But, what you bring up about the tie to, an extremist group, I mean, federally, there are organizations that call like Moms for Liberty an extremist group, and so, but also, is it applied fairly? Because I would say there's a lot of extremists, more extremists on the left in our state than on the right. I mean, you look at Antifa and related organizations, rioters that have destroyed cities tied to BLM. So if they have a tie to BLM, is that an extremist group? I mean, I don't know. I would imagine they would say no. So you're right. There's a lot of room for discretion. I guess when I see this, I just see it as a path to making the job of sheriff appointed across the state. Do you see that as the direction they're going, like they did in King County?
Well, that's certainly one solution. What I see is that, and again, I think that there is room for improvement. I think that there is room to establish qualifications. This just isn't the right path. Anything that takes the power of the voters away and hands it to the state, I think is generally the wrong direction. And that's literally what this does. The sheriff, the office of sheriff, is a reflection of that community. They decide the law enforcement philosophy that they want in their community. We're all charged with supporting the law, and sometimes the law, it can be very challenging. And that's one of the big questions that gets asked is, will you enforce unconstitutional laws? No. But at the same time, the Constitution, in the separation of powers, tells us who gets to decide if a law is unconstitutional. It's the judicial branch. That's their role. It's not the executive branch. And so to get a clearer picture, the voters should decide who they elect, and they should decide who they unelect. Not a panel, not a group appointed by the state. You're not supposed to control sheriffs through the legislature, right?
Yeah.
That's the legislative branch, and we're the executive branch, and we are supposed to do our own jobs. And if we don't do our jobs properly, then the voters deal with us. And Washington voters have shown time and time again, they know how to deal with this if we're not doing our job. This particular coalition subscribes to a very, very anti-sheriff, anti-law enforcement philosophy. Now, it was brought to my attention that first thing this morning, they took down those links and severed any connection with some of those authors, if you will. But sheriffs also aren't, are there some sheriffs out there that fit that mold? Yes. Washington sheriffs don't. We're not the extremist, white supremacist, law enforcement that they're trying to paint us to be. We want to work with the legislature. We want to enforce the laws. We want to keep people safe, and we want to do it in accordance with the Constitution and our public. So I think the biggest challenge for most of us is that you're trying to demonize us so that you can provide a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, except in some very rare cases. And that generally creates very poor legislation.
Bingo. And it has created very poor legislation in our state on the public safety front. We've seen it a million times, trying to police people on the far, far fringe loony left, and the devastation that can have on public safety. So this is, make no mistake, this is Democrats in Olympia and far left anti-police activists who want as much control as possible over law enforcement. And they want to make sure that the sheriffs that are elected in their image. They want to make King County Sheriff and that being an appointed position, they want that across the state, and then they want to set rules that dictate what kind of appointee it can be. It's not going to be able to be a constitutional sheriff. It's not going to be able to be a conservative sheriff. So even if you're in a red county, you're going to get the sheriff that Olympia wants you to get. And it's scary stuff. And the sad part is they have the power to be able to do it and to not listen to anything that any of us have to say about it. All right. Okay. I'm not going to try to get you to start the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic program before the end of the year. I know that is probably a losing battle. We're like a week away from Christmas. You're not going to do it. However, if you already know that you have some weight to lose, if you are already thinking about making that your New Year's resolution, you can get started on laying the groundwork for it today. I have lost 40 pounds on the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic program. I started my journey 2 years ago, 60 days of hard work followed by a lifetime of some simple lifestyle changes. And it starts by doing a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ryan Coogan and his team. So you could do that this week. You could say, look, Dr. C, I am not happy with my weight. I'm not going to start this program before Christmas. However, I would love to get a jump start on it coming up January 1st or January 2nd or whatever it is. So you can be ready to do the program, dive right into it, and be ready to dedicate 60 days to not just, it is hard work, but you can lose 20 to 30 pounds in the first 60 days, and I promise you it is absolutely worth it. So eastsideweightlossclinic.com, eastsideweightlossclinic.com. All right, well, some gun violence is great. Some gun violence, not so good. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. All right, so we all agree school shootings are horrible. That is absolutely a universally condemnable form of gun violence. There was another school shooting that happened. 15-year-old Natalie Rupnow also went by Samantha. It's kind of been weird. The identity has been a little weird on the internet. But 15 years old, who opened fire in Wisconsin, at a school in Wisconsin. It's just sad. It's sad until this happens. The other two, so she died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. She killed 2 people, a teacher and a teenage student. Police haven't identified them yet. 6 people, 1 teacher, 5 students were injured. 4 remain hospitalized. So the school shooting's awful, obviously. But of course, the Democrats immediately jump into gun control, which you kind of expect at this point. And like, it doesn't automatically offend me to have a conversation about guns after a shooting. It doesn't automatically offend me. What offends me is when you want to jump into a conversation about gun control after certain shootings, but then the rest of the time you act completely different. So here's the statement from the White House. I'm going to read most of it for you because it sets up the point that I'm going to make. Statement from President Joe Biden on the shooting at Abundant Life Christian School in Wisconsin. Today, families in Madison, Wisconsin are grieving the loss of those who were killed and wounded at Abundant Life Christian School. Shocking and unconscionable. He said, we need Congress to act now. From Newton to Uvalde, Parkland to Madison, to so many other shootings that don't receive attention, it is unacceptable that we are unable to protect our children from this scourge of gun violence. We cannot continue to accept it as normal. Every child deserves to feel safe in their classrooms. Students across our country should be learning how to read and write, not having to learn how to duck and cover. Jill and I are praying for all the victims today, including the teacher and teenage student who were killed and who sustained injuries. My administration has taken aggressive action to combat the gun violence epidemic. We passed the most significant gun safety legislation in nearly 30 years. I've taken more executive action to reduce gun violence than any other president in history. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You get the point, right? So all that's pretty fine and normal from the Democratic Party. School shootings are horrible. We do need to figure out as a nation how to prevent them. But here's the problem. So back on, can you go to statements first? The statements from the White House. So here's a list of statements from the White House the first week in December. So right now on this list for this week, you would see that statement involving the shooting at the school. Is there any particular big story and major national story involving guns that you can think of the first week in December that you would assume for an administration that cares so much about deadly gun violence would be on this list? Yeah, the murder in broad daylight in Manhattan of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. Fatally shot from behind by an armed gunman who did so, we now know, because of political reasons, for political purposes. Brazen attack. Nothing from the White House that week. President Biden puts out statements on all sorts of things. No statement on that. Not only no statement on that, you have seen the left, many on the left, celebrate the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. People on the left getting tattoos. Deny, defend, depose, or whatever it is. People celebrating the killer. Fawning over the killer on social media. There was a traffic board on Queen Anne that somebody had changed to, 1 down, more to go. And the left's acting like that's completely normal. You had leftist bloggers and commentators who were excusing the assassination of that healthcare CEO in broad daylight. But now, now it happened at a school, and so now you want us to believe that you really, really care about gun violence and gun control. And not only that, I feel like the need to point it out, Biden pardoned his son Hunter in part on gun charges. So how can you sit here and tell the American people you really, really are morally consistent, you care about gun control and all of these things? You just pardoned your son on gun charges. The left and Democrats, and not just a few, a lot, were celebrating the murder with a gun of a healthcare CEO, which you didn't feel the need to put a public press release out about. So that's the thing with the gun control conversation that Democrats want to have, and I feel the same here locally. They really pick and choose what to them fits their narrative. More shootings, record number of shootings and shots fired in Seattle? No, that doesn't fit our narrative. We can't talk about that. Actually trying to keep gang members from having guns and juveniles from having guns that they steal or that traded on. No, we can't talk about that. We got to focus on preventing law-abiding citizens from getting access to firearms. That's the only thing that really blows air up our skirt. And Chicago, the places having the most challenge with gun violence are Democratic areas. And I know Chicago is like the easy example, but it's an easy example because it's so obvious. You have Democrats who just wax poetic about how bad guns are, and they don't want to talk about the many, many more people who are killed in cities like Chicago and other Democratic cities, but they want to appeal to people's emotions when children are killed. Healthcare CEO murdered in broad daylight? Yeah, I'm going to get a tattoo of his face. The gun's good in that case. Children are killed, gun's bad. So you just have to be morally consistent, and I won't have such a problem with it. But there's very little moral consistency in politics today. Unbelievable. All right. I've encouraged you guys to take the First Mark Challenge, firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com. Why? Because it's free. Why else? Because they could save you a ton of money, like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year. You never pay them anything, people. I don't know how else to convince you to do it. We get so many stories. I know a lot of you have, because we get so many nice emails from undivided viewers and listeners who are like, I did the First Mark Challenge, and the common theme is, why did I wait so long to do this? I don't know. I don't know why you waited so long. Procrastination, I guess. Let's see. Beth says, Brandi, I listen to First Mark commercials every day for years. Well, last week I reached out to them. Our annual premiums are going down more than $4,000. You're welcome. You're welcome. And she said, I can't believe I waited so long. Exactly. So take the First Mark Challenge today. We all need insurance. You can't get around that unless you want to be a criminal, which I know you're not. Bad idea to just not have insurance. But you can look to see if you have the right insurance for your needs and if you have it at the best price. And First Mark can handle all of that for you for free. They are the experts. The very best part is they work for you, not the insurance companies. FirstMarkInsurance.com, FirstMarkInsurance.com. All right, we'll fit one national story in here just because, lift us up a little bit. Give us some hope that things aren't so insane. So Disney has just pulled a transgender storyline from Pixar's Win or Lose streaming series, which there is, and this is from the Hollywood Reporter. There's so many of these kids shows that they just shove into all of them like some sort of trans character. It's like you got to have the transgender or like gender fluid character, have to have a character in a wheelchair for sure. And then you need to make sure that every color of the rainbow is reflected in the skin color of the characters in cartoons. Like that's absolutely every single one of them, which is fine. Little diversity is great. But when you are having cartoons that kids are watching have conversations about gender, non-binary, trans pronouns and stuff, that's clearly indoctrination. So this again from the Hollywood Reporter, a spokesperson for Disney confirmed that the story arc in this Win or Lose series was removed and provided the following statement to the Hollywood Reporter. When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their own terms and timeline. Oh my God. Holy smokes. That's all we ask. That's all anybody's ever asking. If something is even remotely controversial for kids, especially when you're talking about a subject that does have to do with sex, then let parents talk to them about it on their own timeline. I think it's because the Daily Wire, which started all this other content, like movies, non-woke stuff, like you can have stuff for your kids that you can watch via Daily Wire that's not going to be like dripping with indoctrination. Mm-hmm. I think that they're probably realizing that parents like that.
Well, yeah. And I also think that they realized like go woke, go broke.
Go woke,
I think
go
these
broke.
things aren't making money for them and it's not working out.
Yeah.
Of course it had to be the softball team. Why does it always have to be the softball team that's all, woke and...
I don't know what the series is about.
Gay, lesbian, trans, like
all
these people on the softball team.
Okay.
Hey, straight people can be on softball teams too.
It's a, can they? It says it's an original animated show about a co-ed high school team. It debuts on Disney Plus in February. So it was going to debut with a transgender storyline, and they've opted to not have it do that.
Yeah.
Because they want to let parents have those conversations with kids.
Well, thank you, Disney.
There you go, Disney. Let's keep it up.
I mean, this is
Let's
a
keep
small
it rolling.
step. Disney has a long way to go.
That's all
but
right.
This
We
is
got to
a small
accept
step.
change. I'm accepting genuine change. I mean, if it's because of money, I don't even care. If you're doing it because of money, great. Keep doing it because of money.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, that's a signal, right? You're not making money, so this isn't working.
Right. I'd like you to wake up. All right. I want to get to our daily subscribers show poll. I asked you guys on Patreon, Locals, and X this morning. How should the state of Washington handle the housing of transgender inmates? It's a poll question I've asked before. I think it's been quite a while, but I'm curious if your position on it has changed, because we just talked about what's going on with the WIAA and the Interscholastic Activities Association and their decision about what do we do with transgender athletes. Do we let them be on the team that matches their preferred gender? Do they have to be on the team of their birth gender? Or do we create a separate league for them and have a third division? So that's what I ask you guys. So what do you prefer that our prison system do? They house them in the prison that matches their real gender. They house them in the prison that matches their gender identity, or they house them in some sort of separate facility specifically for trans inmates who want to be in a separate facility. Nicole, what say you?
Real. Option number one.
Option number one.
Actual identity.
I think last time we did this, I said separate, like put them in some sort of separate area. But I tend to disagree now because you know what? We're already putting enough money towards like 22 individuals. If they want to be in solitary confinement because they're that concerned, Brian Kim made that decision. Mm-hmm. He got sent to was in the women's prison, got sent back, and he's like, well, I'm going to be in solitary confinement. He's complaining about it, but that was a choice he had to make. So it's like, no, I don't think we need to hire more guards and more whatever and all these extra things specifically for a segment of 22 people in the prison population.
Well, and they mentioned in that article that a lot of the male or the female to male transgender people decide to stay in the female prison because they don't want to go to a male prison, obviously, and be subjected to a bunch of men that probably don't care what they identify as. But why don't we just keep them in their prisons and actually make sure nobody gets harassed? Okay.
Oh, gee. Wait.
Well, I mean, I guess
keep
you
them
can't
safe?
Keep them safe. I guess that's the job of them anyway, right?
It is the job of the Department of Corrections.
Why don't we just work on that?
That's a good point. You know, I might feel differently if like you came into prison and you're transgender and you've been through all the surgeries and stuff, but like also you don't commit a crime. Like if you're transgender, you know that time in prison might be real rough for you. Mm-hmm. Like that might be a good thing.
Happiness is on the outside. So why don't you stay on the outside?
Don't go to prison. I hate to say that. Mm-hmm. I want people treated with dignity in prison. You know, it is the job of the Department of Corrections. People have rights. You're not sentenced to death every time you go into prison, unless, we don't do death anymore, but you could be sentenced to life in prison. But somebody gets a sentence. They're there to serve their sentence, and they're supposed to be able to get out, alive.
And if you get out, you can continue on your journey of whatever you want to be.
Not paid for by the taxpayers. Right. That's ridiculous. I can't go into prison and get some fake tatas on the taxpayer dime unless I'm transgender. Then I probably could.
Then you could.
Man, I just need to make a quick stint in prison to finish my laser hair removal, get some fake tatas, and get it all paid for by taxpayers. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mark says they're prisoners in jail for felonies. They are not guests at the Holiday Inn. I bet you our prisons are better than the Holiday Inn. Maybe some of them. Sandy, let's be really clear. If you have a penis, you're in the male jail. If you have a vagina, you're in the female jail. That's a pretty simple way to think of it. Oh my God. Chris Horblet says your first option says it all. Real gender. Probably getting in trouble for saying real gender.
I almost changed it for you.
No, it is your real gender.
Like,
it is real gender. I'm done playing games. Diana says, call me a hard ass, but prison isn't supposed to be cushy. You are supposed to not want to be there. I vote for a criminal to go to prison based on the sex they were born as. I agree with that too. Gabrielle K on Local says, call the bluff. Do not accept the power grab of this trans language shift. And that's why I hate reading like the Seattle Times article where I have to call a double murderer male she, because I'm reading from their quote, and then everybody gets confused. Like, is it a she? Is it a he? And it's just all ridiculous. So I try not to give into the language as much as possible. But again, my whole thing with the pronouns, I've said it a million times. I'm just going to call you your name. I'm not using, I used to be okay with the he, she, her thing. They, them was always too much, whatever it is. I'm not doing that. That's not grammatically correct. But also, I'm not going to do the he, she, her thing or whatever. I'll call you your name. If you tell me your name is Twinkle Toes, I'll be like, Twinkle Toes, how are you today? It's so nice to see you. Like, I'll respect you with your name. But I'm not going to change, I don't know why I said Twinkle Toes. I don't know why I said that. But I'm not going to change like my vocabulary to suit how you're feeling at any given time. Is that mean? Probably not. I don't know. All right, we'll get to questions, comments, and our closing sanity check, which takes us up to Canada. First, get a second opinion on your retirement portfolio. It's one of the most important things that you'll do in your life is plan for and then ultimately retire and be able to live out your golden years. And so just like some sort of serious health decision that you might get a second opinion on, getting a second opinion on your retirement portfolio and a second perspective makes sense. Zach Abraham, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Bulwark Capital, and his team can help you with that. They can do their free Know Your Risk Portfolio review with you. During that, they'll cover the impacts of the election, since it's timely, and outlook for 2025. And they'll give you a full reveal of how Bulwark is always looking for opportunities to lower risk, lower cost, and give your retirement as much upside as possible. You only get one retirement. Get a second opinion. Schedule your free portfolio review now at knowyourriskradio.com. Knowyourriskradio.com. Okay, questions, comments. Let's see here. Jeff Monahan says, hear me out. A GoFundMe to build a wall around Olympia. If it goes well, we can see what to do about King County. Just perusing options for sanity. Yeah. I mean, you know what? Olympia and Seattle already think that they're a city on a hill, an untouchable city on a hill, and they're preaching down to us from the mount. I'm sure they want a wall to keep all you horrible conservatives out of the equation. All right, Matthew Cook, you too can get elected to a city council and be paid to be a professional virtue signaler. I guess. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would be signaling my virtue, but can you imagine being a sane person on the Olympia City Council or on the Seattle City Council? Maybe a little more so Seattle's better now. Oh my God, can you imagine sitting in on that meeting where they're talking about making Olympia a sanctuary city for the LGBTQ plus and trans community? I don't think I'd last a month in that job. I don't know who wants those jobs. Marksman Hitman, what about the new law? Can't we call the police and tell them the government is harassing us with new taxes? Oh, you're talking about the hate crime hotline? No.
Oh,
what is
I
the
think
new
he's
law?
just saying, like, we just need to make that a law. We're talking about all these laws. So how about we make a law where you can...
Being harassed. I feel intimidated by the government. Charlie K. Olympia is spending time and money fighting imaginary foes and creating unneeded anxiety. They all need therapy. Yeah, unfortunately, making laws for you is their therapy. They're taking it out on you. Real bummer. It's just Woody. Brandy's $2 super chat. Disney is trying to separate its tie to Epstein. I don't know. Maybe they are. They're trying to do something, but I think I agree with Nicole. They're probably seeing some sort of monetary decline, and I don't know if they've really had to come to Jesus or if they've had to come to the green god of cash and greed. Bonnie, geez, maybe we need to pay attention to the mental health of our youth instead of adding so much negativity to growing minds. Stop with the gender garbage. To get to the point of schooling at schools, there has to be warning signs. Pay attention to your children. Yeah. The more and more that we hand control over our children to the government, the more and more disturbed those children are going to be. All right, good comments per the usual today. And with that, let's get to our closing sanity check. I will at some point learn how to say Pierre Poilievre's last name. That's my homework for tomorrow. Pierre Poilievre. So he's the opposition leader up in Canada trying to replace Justin Trudeau. I shared this clip on social media last night because he's talking about Justin Trudeau and how he really believes that his success is measured by how much money he spends. And as he was talking about this, I was like, he might as well be talking about Jay Inslee.
The government is coming out with a $1.3 billion plan to address border security. Do you think that's enough to stop Trump's tariffs? And if it was up to you, how much specifically would you spend on border security? What number would you put on it?
Well, you ask a classically CBC question, which is how much money can you spend on a problem? Well, that's the wrong question. That's exactly the question Trudeau has been asking for 9 years. It's the reason he's doubled our debt while making everything worse. For example, he spent $80 billion on housing affordability. Well, how'd that work? He doubled housing costs. He spent $60 million on his gun confiscation. 0 guns. He spent millions on a school food program that hasn't served a single solitary meal. So we should not judge a program based on how expensive we can make it. We should judge it by what it can do. How many helicopters? How many drones? How many boots on the ground? That's the question I will be asking when I'm Prime Minister. And how do we deliver it for the lowest possible price to taxpayers? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a Prime Minister who said, we secured the borders, we put more boots on the ground, we stopped tons and tons of fentanyl from traveling back and forth, we arrested the terrorists, we shut down the organized crime, we reduced gun crime, and by the way, we did it with less tax dollars. That's how our mentality has to change. We have to stop judging politicians by how expensive they can make things and start judging them by the results they get. You went into a restaurant and had a terrible experience. The food was awful. You got food poisoning. The service was bad. You wouldn't walk out and say, but it was great because it cost me $1,000. And because it's the most expensive restaurant around, it must be the best. No, we judge the meal by the food on the plate and the service that delivered it. That's how I'm going to run a common sense conservative government.
God, that's good. 100%. And he's so true. They judge success based on how much money they spend on a program. Oh, we've dedicated $100 million toward this, but you've had absolutely no outcomes. And therefore, the program was not successful. I wish more people thought just like him. That has been your sanity check for today. That has been today's episode of Undivided. We are gearing up for our final live show of the year. Doesn't mean we're abandoning you for the rest of the year, but tomorrow will be our final live show of the year. So we'll talk to you about what's in store for you in the weeks ahead. In the meantime, it's Christmas. Is it Christmas next week, Nicole? Mm-hmm. Christmas is next week. Give your loved ones the gift of common sense. Patreon.com/undivided/gift. I can't think of a better gift to give your family or foes this holiday season. If you have not signed up to support our show, you can do that for just $5 a month. You get access to our exclusive Sunday show, Sundays with subscribers, and you can also take part in our daily show polls and get your comments read. That's often fun. undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com, the new and improved undividedpod.com. All right, we'll see you right here on the live show tomorrow, same time, 12:01, 12:02, whenever. Ta-ta.